Good evening. Welcome to the new edition of the Nuggetsima podcast. We are in a bit of a shorter rotation today because we have two guys on load management. Mislav and Milan are resting to be fresh for the draft night, I'm guessing. So my name is Miroslav. I'm calling from Pančevo, Serbia. Next to me on my right, hopefully, it's Voja from Nebraska. Good evening, Voja,
everybody.
or good day in your case. And our special guest today is the NBA writer for the Action Network and also the co-host of the Locked On Nuggets podcast, together with our dear friend Adam Mares. It's Matt Moore. Matt, good day to you, and thank you for giving us your time.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, is this the first time you've had international broadcasts?
I think I've done like one or two in Europe, but I don't think it's probably the first time in several years I've done one. Yeah.
Oh, first time in Serbia, probably for sure.
First time in Serbia. I'm very excited for it.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Okay. So we just had the bubble experience a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago. And before the bubble started, we had no idea how it would look like. We were afraid of the level of the basketball we will see, but we got some really, really great individual performances from several players, especially some great shooting performances. Can you tell me, in comparison to what you expected to see in the bubble, was the game better, worse? Was it more fun, less fun? How would you grade it?
It was way better. The people that I talked to in the NBA all expected it to be really bad. They all expected it to be terrible basketball. And so they were very excited. And everyone came out thinking that it went off really well. The players, I think, deserve a lot of credit for handling how much of a mental strain it was being inside the bubble for that long, being cut off from family and the outside world and playing a lot of board games and things like that. They really focused in on the basketball, and it showed. I think that when you don't have travel as a component, that really helped as well. But the basketball itself, all the games were competitive. They were hard fought. They were well played. The shooting was great. In a lot of ways, I preferred the bubble to what we usually see at the end of the season in normal circumstances where everyone's just kind of going through the motions. The intensity level was really high, and I thought that the games were a lot of fun to watch.
Do you feel some kind of a tournament at the end of the season might be a more fun experience comparing to the regular playoffs?
I am very big into the idea of a tournament. I think there should be some sort of tournament format added to the season. I just think that when you get players into that kind of environment where every game matters, you get better basketball than it is during the regular season where it's like, well, you know, if we lose this one, we can win the next two, or all we got to do is win three more, whatever it is. And then the effort level just isn't as high versus in a tournament type of atmosphere. Everybody's there. It's very intense. You're seeing these guys everywhere. I think the competition level is much higher. I like the idea of a tournament very much.
Do you think that tournament should be like a play-in from like 10 to 7 when we heard? Because what you said with the bubble, that end of the season might have been also like a fun end of the season might have been contributed to the 8 and 9 playing games, because we saw Lillard go off and go crazy because they had something to go for. Phoenix go 8-0, that kind of stuff. Do you think that would be a good idea for this shortened season to have like a play-in tournament?
Yeah, I mean, I think the league is very high on the idea of the play-in because of how the format worked out, having that Memphis versus Portland game, having those games late in the bubble really matter. I think I'll be interested to see whether they expand it into more playoff seeds or not, just because part of what you need to do is you need to get rid of so many games where teams don't have anything to play for. Like the NBA is pretty open about this, that their goal is to have as many games at the end of the season matter as much as possible. And so you want to try and build that kind of excitement in, which is one reason I think that they might expand it a little bit. But I do think the play-in is something that I think they're probably going to adapt, given how popular I think this one was for them.
Sorry, I mean, this kind of popped in my head. What do you think about, is there an option for like a tournament for the lottery, maybe even? Like the best, I mean, like all of the top of the bottom teams to like try to fight for the #1 seed in some cases. Maybe this year, not do gimmick like every year, just in this kind of weird year.
Yeah, so I think the problem with doing it for a lottery seed, because everyone kind of points to that, but the problem is you have to think about what the motivation level is for the players. So if you're a player and I say to you, hey, we're going to have this tournament, and if you win it, guess what? We're going to draft a guy that might take your job. How exciting is that? And then I don't think that works, right? That's so true, I think instead, I did have this idea for a tournament structure where the winner of it got a playoff seed and a pick. I think if you do both of those things, now the organization has a reason to go for it and the players have a reason to go for it. And those two things, I think, together make it really valuable. Now, you'd have probably the mid-level teams, the 5-6 seeds, being like, so they get a good pick and they make the playoffs, and all we do is make the playoffs. But somebody's going to have to give here. And I think, those mid-level playoff teams, especially in the Eastern Conference, are probably the ones that need to bend a little bit.
Okay. Another thing, we know for some time now that Drew Holiday is on the table. Yeah. I'm not going to ask you about him because you probably spoke like 100 times about him. Another guy that's been available because he requested a trade is Russell Westbrook. Do you have some inside information about which teams are actually interested in him? Because there was a report, and I hope it's a very false report, that even Nuggets are interested in Russell Westbrook. Can you tell us something about that?
Yeah, I'll just say right now, like, the Nuggets are not going to trade for Russell Westbrook. Like, I don't want to rule anything out because the NBA is crazy and sometimes it catches me off guard. But the people I've spoken with are like, no, that's not going to happen. Most teams I've spoken with around the league have said that they think the list for Russell Westbrook's trade suitors will be very short. I think the Knicks will be on that list. I think the Hornets will be on that list. I think there are a few other teams, possibly Detroit, that might fit the bill. There's a couple of teams I think that will, but they're all going to be, I think, very lottery teams. I don't think any of the winning teams are going to, because just in order to make up for his $41 million, you have to find a way to send out that much money. And in order to do that, you have to, by proxy, give up contracts that are large enough to, and presumably those large contracts are good players. And nobody wants to send like multiple good players for where Russell Westbrook is in his career. ESPN had a speculative report that Harden might fit with the Nuggets. First off, Houston reporters have reported that Harden does not want to trade, that he wants to stay. And second, I don't think that there's a deal to be made between Houston and Denver for Harden based off of what Houston would want for their all-time franchise player beyond outside of Hakeem Olajuwon. There's just not a real framework there. I think that for the Nuggets, players like Drew Holiday, players like Bradley Beal, some of these other options are probably more likely rather than a Westbrook or Harden trade.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So the new season is coming to us really, really fast. The draft is like in 6 days. The training camps are in 18 days or something like that. And the season is just a bit more than a month from now. Tell me, what do executives in the league say about the upcoming season, about the shortened season, 2 months less, only 10 games less than that? What are their expectations compared to a normal season, if they even have it?
Very low. Their expectations are very low. Now, I will say this. The same executives told me that they thought that the basketball in Orlando was going to be really bad. They thought that the bubble was going to be pretty bad basketball, that everybody would be out of shape and everybody would be distracted by the virus and it would be very bad. And they were all pleasantly surprised. But they're doubly concerned about this season. They don't feel the players have had enough time to, the ones that played in the playoffs have had enough time to recover from the mental strain of that experience. They don't feel that the teams that have been off for so long are going to have enough ramp-up time to be really in condition. So there's doubly an injury concern. There's concern that the players that are tired will get hurt and the players that are too rusty will get hurt. Both of those are concerns I've heard. They think that the schedule, by its necessity of being 72 games, is probably going to require a lot of back-to-backs and cramming in games in the schedule. That's going to lead to fatigue, and that's going to lead to injury. That the ongoing concerns with the virus, as it's absolutely out of control in the United States as it has been for months, but is now even worse, that's going to contribute to cancellations and then guys missing time for positive tests, which means more workload for everyone else, and that factors into the injury issues. it's a mess is the pretty much consensus of everybody, is that they're going to have to do this because the money is too much, but there's a real concern about what level of basketball we're going to get.
I want to believe, so like I'm usually also the sour type in here too. So I want to believe that, you know how sometimes in the, we had the flu games when you're something's not good with you and then you get more focused. I want to believe that that's kind of what's going to happen with the season, that players are, it's not going to be all perfect, but they might focus more, because of it, and even the training staffs and everyone going to be on their best game to get this season on wraps. Also, I mean, what do you think? It wasn't reported, but shouldn't at this point a lot of players have probably had COVID and got through it? That might, with the bubble, we had so many late arrivals. That might be the case that a lot of them don't have an issue at this point with that. Won't have an issue at this point.
Right. So especially with the Nuggets, I think you have to look at them and be okay, half the roster had it. Yeah. But so there's conflicting information right now about how long the antibodies last. Some think that it's a long-lasting multi-years thing, or maybe perhaps lifetime. And then there's others that feel that it might only be 3-4 months of the antibodies, and then you're back to being at risk. So we don't really know how to project that. We just don't know enough about the virus. We haven't known enough about the virus. We continue to not know enough about the virus. But I will say, to your point, we watched Denver specifically last year when they were without Will Barton, Jamal Murray, and Gary Harris, and all of these guys that were missing in January. They beat the Bucks and the Jazz on the back-to-back. This team has always done really well in adverse conditions. So the Nuggets, I actually think, will probably rise to the occasion. I think it's more of an issue with the Nuggets in terms of the long-term view of how do we keep Nikola Jokic in shape? How do we keep him in good condition? Because when he gets tired, he tends to put on weight. And then, so those two things are kind of tied together, and you want to make sure that he's not exhausted all the time. And he's been incredibly endurant. He's just has such a high level of endurance. He goes out there and he plays. Everyone worries about, is he going to be exhausted? And he goes out and puts up 30 and 15. So I don't worry about it too much, but I do think that if you want to keep your players in the best condition at the end of the season to compete, because you're not going to have that 4-month layoff, hopefully this time, I do think that that's maybe the big concern for Denver, is making sure that, Jamal Murray, who's always banged up, is not just, held together with tape at the end. I think that's a big concern.
Yeah, I mean, it's again with Jokic, it's the same level of concern as any superstar you want to have, just for load managing and all the injuries. Even right. LeBron does that thing. I mean, we talked about this is a little bit more a serious, right off the bat, just to get out of the way. I kind of want to, since you're covering the Nuggets, and we hear you a lot of times in the post game videos and interactions with players. How hard is it to sometimes stay objective, about the guys you meet and interact with so many days each year, especially when they're as good people as these Nuggets seem to be? How hard is it to be objective when you have to do the shows and write about them, criticize them, and and talk about realistically of what their values are? How hard is it to be objective that way?
I think it's difficult, but I keep a pretty wide distance, and I don't think the players. There are some people that mesh very naturally with the players, that they get along with them very well. I get along fine because I'm professional and I know how to ask questions, but I'm not somebody that's very buddy with the players, and that's not because I don't like them. I like many of them very much. I think Will Barton is a stellar human being. I think Gary Harris is a really good dude. I think I think Nikola Jokic is a very warm-hearted person. I think he's a very warm, loving person. I think Torrey Craig is extremely humble, and I'm always drawn to humble people. So there's that. But I always only talk to players if I absolutely need something from them, because the thing that I always try and keep in mind is that players make millions and millions. The most valuable thing to an NBA player is their time, because the league demands that they're available for film sessions, training, conditioning, treatment, shoot around, games, pregame availability, postgame availability, special media with TV partners, corporate events. All of these things take away their time. And so I only really interact with players when I'm I really want to know this question. This is important for my job to understand, for my coverage of the Nuggets. And I think part of it also is that I worked and I did blogging for so long at CBS. I've seen the course of players. I know that players change. And what I mean that is sometimes they're young and brash and rude, and they evolve into very mature and thoughtful people. And sometimes they start off as very humble and just endearing people. And then the money kind of gets to them and they become a little bit more callous because of all the demands that are made of them and how they see how the league works. They get traded multiple times. All of these things kind of play a part. And so what I kind of trying to remember is that the biggest mistake that media makes is believing that the people that we interact with are really themselves. I think that there's a persona that players, and they're taught this, to give themselves like a persona that they deal with us. And it's not that they're all fake in terms of the nice ones. It works the other way. Russell Westbrook is the single rudest human being I have ever dealt with in a media context. Russell Westbrook is also known as like the most loving, wonderful teammate and person to be around. Everyone in the Oklahoma City organization loves him. He does tons of charity stuff on his own with no media. Boogie Cousins is the same way. And so I try and always just remember that this is a professional relationship. There's nothing personal here. I will say that the one guy that I have like a real soft spot for is Gary Harris. And the reason for that is I watched that kid be miserable every single game when he wasn't playing under Brian Shaw. I watched him suffer as he just got no time, as he had no confidence in his game and did not know if he was going to have a future in the league. I saw him sit through all that and then work his way into being a starter rotation player, very quality player in the Nuggets. I've seen him deal with injury and how frustrating that's been for him. So like I have a soft spot in my heart for Gary Harris, but at the same time, when we talk about Jrue Holiday trades, I have to talk about Gary Harris and about how he might get traded and how probably, how undeniably Jrue Holiday is an upgrade on Gary Harris, because you have to maintain that objective view in order to have a real good perspective on who the team is, so you can be as honest as possible with your audience.
I mean, that's a great answer. And I mean, you would hope everyone is the same way. And I mean, you kind of, this is, kind of really follows into my next question, which you probably answered, is like, whose nugget that, over the years when you covered, was like, whose growth and improvement impressed you the most? But I'm assuming that's Gary Harris, since you said, since you said it that way, earlier.
No, actually, I would actually say Jamal. Jamal Murray. So Jamal, we were in Summer League and I was with CBS and I asked for 5 minutes with him for a quick Q&A that I was going to put up on the website. And it's Summer League and he hasn't done anything in the league. He has done nothing. And he big timed me and was like, I'm not doing this. I'm out of here. And Nick O'Hare, or no, it wasn't Nick O'Hare. It was the former PR officer, was like, pulled him back. I was like, you got to do this. Like, this is part of the job now. Like, you have to do this. And so he sat there and he did it. Jamal, I sat down for a one-on-one interview with Jamal that never ran because the season fell apart in like 2017 or 18. I forget when. He was like one of the worst interviews that I've ever done. He was just like was not impressed to be there. And that's okay. Like, I don't hold it against, like, every player. The only thing I ever say is that players have to answer the question. They don't have to answer them well. So I don't hold it against players if they don't want to answer these things. And if they prefer other reporters, I don't hold that against them either. I think that that's fair. But to see the way that Jamal really opened up in the bubble, to see the thoughtful answers that he gave on social justice issues here in the United States, he did more than that, though. We held a media call with him during the hiatus, and he openly reached out and was like, how are you guys doing? Like, he was very warm and open. And I think that part of that is just like he's maturing. And I think some of his temper is fading too. And I think that that's good. But his maturity is, I did not expect him. I'll be honest about this. I had very low expectations for his long-term maturity. I thought he could be a great player, but I did not have very high expectations for his maturity long-term. He was a Kentucky guard that was brash and wanted to score all the time. And typically those players tend to have an attitude. And instead, he's an exceptionally hard worker. He's kept pretty humble. He's become a real core of the franchise. His growth to me really stands out as something remarkable.
That's great. I mean, you and obviously the play also showed it. That's kind of funny how sometimes that reflects it too, just how one affects the other. And well, now we you talked about maturity. Now we gotta talk about the inevitable MPJ question of from your perspective, what was something that you would make him study in the off season? We talked about it here, like during our time, all early podcasts and stuff about maybe have him study Miami motions, like off the pick and roll stuff, that he can be the guy that punishes the help side defense on Jokic and Murray pick and rolls, you know, movements that Duncan Robinson does, Klay Thompson does, that kind of stuff. Do you think that's something that he should be doing, or there's something else entirely that he should be looking at?
I think it's tough because no one works on defense in the off season. It's entirely an in-season construct because you need your team and you have to work on the system. If he was willing to stay in Denver in this, you know, the off season, which is like the next 3 weeks, I would say that like the biggest thing is just to work with the coaches and say, I want to go over film, see what mechanisms I don't understand, and then practice them in a slow walkthrough environment. Because so much of it with him is not his instincts or his athleticism or his effort. Like, he's a high effort player so far. I don't know if that's going to hold, but he's a high effort player. He just doesn't know what he's doing. And that's a problem. And so for me, it's just like, if he can just get to the point where, look, there are some players that pick it up quick. I have every great defender, I ask them how much they pay attention to the scouting report. And it's funny because early in their careers, they pay a lot of attention to it. They study it in detail because they know that's how they're going to get paid. And so they go over it and they do their homework and they know the expectations. When they get older, 28, 29, 30, like I asked Paul Millsap 2 years ago when he was only the brisk young age of 33, I asked him, you know, how much do you pay attention to the scouting report? He's like, when I was 25, 26, I studied it every single night. Before I went to bed, I went over it, and then I went over it again in the morning. And now he says, he's like, I've just played enough, and I know all these guys, and if I don't know them, I can pick it up how they play versus other guys I've played quick enough to know what I need to do, so I don't need to pay attention to it anymore. And I think with MPJ, the biggest thing is he's just got to learn stuff in such a repetition manner, because I don't think he's ever going to pick it up naturally. He's not an instinctively good defender. He's not an instinctively aware player. So he needs to work on the stuff in terms of the team construct. I have zero concerns about his offense. Like, Malone is going to work him into the offense. Jokic is going to work him into the offense. Jamal's going to work him into the offense. And just by the fact that I expect him to be a starter, he's going to get enough reps to where he's going to have those opportunities. And he's so good, even if he doesn't do things perfect offensively, he's still going to score. But on defense, and in terms of not frustrating his teammates, he needs to learn where to go. This is the biggest thing. He just needs to do stuff to where his teammates are not annoyed with him. That's the very low bar he's got to get to, because he's so talented. Everyone's going to back him once they see what he can do to help them win. But he's got to learn the little stuff. And the only way to really do that is to take the time and drill it over and over again.
Yeah, there's nothing more frustrating than you know, trying to like patch someone's like lack of defensive effort, not effort, just like spacing and stuff.
Right.
But how long do you think the Nuggets can afford to work him in that, you know, defensive system? Is that if the season starts and it gets off to a rocky start because of him, you know, because of his stuff, is patience the key, or is there a sign that you have to like kind of move on from him as quickly as possible because he still has some upside value, or they need to just wait on it?
Are you asking the front office? Are you asking the players? Or are you asking the coaches? Because you're going to get three different answers. The front office is going to say, like, the only way he's going to learn is if you sit there and teach him. Like, you're just going to have to figure it out. Yeah, your defense isn't going to be great, but you need to get better with him, and you have to improve with him because he's too important. The players are likely going to say, yeah, he's a pain in the ass, but he's also really good, and we want to give him that opportunity. Let the kid play. The coaches, however, are probably going to be like, he is going to give me a heart attack. I need to get somebody who's more consistent on the floor. It's going to be a real challenge, I think, early in the season. I think it's going to be really hard for Malone after he trusts MPJ and gives him this opportunity, and when they're getting just absolutely run on the defensive end, not to go back to Paul Millsap. It's going to be very difficult for him to do that. I think it's going to be very hard for him not to make that adjustment. But hopefully he has enough sense to know, like, I got to figure this out. The kid is too good, and if we trade him, my biggest thing with them is I would tell them, if you trade him, he's going to be an all-star on another team, and he's going to likely bust you out of the playoffs. You need to figure this out with him. He is good enough to deal with whatever pains he is. So hopefully that's their mindset, but I think it's going to be a real challenge, especially early in the season.
Yeah, it's kind of Malone going against his own instinct as a old school coach. And
You think there is zero chance that that he isn't the starter on game one?
So I just think that part of it is the understanding that if you look, Malone is more, he's not bound to numbers, but he does pay attention to them. And the best thing about Malone is he doesn't trust his own instincts over everything else. He's discerning in terms of, he talks to his scouts, he talks to his coaches, he talks to his players, he talks to his front office, he looks at the numbers, and he consults other coaches that he knows, and he tries to get like the most complete look. He's very discerning. He's stubborn, but he's also very discerning. Once he establishes like, this is what I think, he sticks with it, and a little bit too long. However, he is willing to at least like look at evidence and be compelled. And I think that any sort of evidence is going to lead you to the conclusion of, when Michael Porter Jr. is on the floor, Jokic and Murray are better. And when MPJ is on the floor with Jokic and Murray, MPJ is better. And that's obvious. Like, yeah, like if you put Torrey Craig on the floor with Jokic and Murray, he's going to be better, right? Like there are no players that aren't better with Nikola on the floor. But because there's a relationship there where he also makes them better and he gives them another shooter, I think eventually that will lead to it. I just also think Malone, for all of his vexation, his frustration with the kid, I think that he also is aware of how good he is. I think everybody in that organization knows how good Michael Porter Jr. is. And so ultimately that's going to have to guide most of the decisions, because coaches will always kind of side with the more talented player. It was one thing last year when he was a rookie and he had to earn stuff, and Millsap was still Millsap, but like Paul knows, like based off of Paul's like body language, he knows. Now, is it possible they start Torrey next to Jeremy Grant? Sure. But I also like, we'll have to wait and see what the roster looks like to know if that's going to be a possibility. And also, I just have a feeling that the organization knows that MPJ is so good, they have to give him a chance. And eventually, I think that pressure will win out and he'll start.
One player I'm selfishly excited about that I have to ask you because of it is Bol. All the teams in the NBA on last year's draft, which was like 18 months ago, every team was really low on him. And so the Nuggets managed to pick him up in the second round. Now we saw a bit of him in the seeding games in the bubble. How does the vibe around him look like now in the league wide? Is he considered a real possible player? Is he a trade chip? Is he a potential rotation player next year?
So I think the best way to put this is that he is so good that he become possibly like the swing chip in a possible trade. He is the player, I think, that the Nuggets have basically said that unless we're getting an MVP caliber player, we're not trading Michael Porter Jr. Like that's the only level of player that they would trade him for. I think Bol, on the other hand, is very much a player that teams go like, okay, well, if we can't get an MPJ, what about Bol? And then I think the Nuggets are open to that possibility. The key with Bol, I think, is that I think he could be a rotation player, absolutely. I think he's very talented. I think they like his upside. I think that the key is that when he is not up against a bad matchup, he's going to look awesome. Runs the floor, blocks jump shots, hits threes, impossibly tall and long, just incredible to watch. I think that when he's in a bad matchup, and then we saw this a little bit in the bubble play, he just gets bullied out of existence. When you run into a guy that can take advantage of him, he gets really targeted. So their use of him until he gets his strength up is going to have to be very careful. They have to avoid certain matchups. So like if they're playing, Derek Favors is a free agent. If Derek Favors signs with a team and he's on the bench, they can't have Bol playing Derek Favors because Derek Favors will just bully him into the basket and then obliterate him. There's other teams that I think will be able to do that. But these teams that go smaller, like if you're playing Golden State, you absolutely 100% want to try him out if they don't get another big. They're supposedly after LaMarcus Aldridge. But if they try and play small ball with Draymond Green, you're like, I'll play Bol versus Draymond Green. That sounds like a good matchup. So he's going to be very selective, I think, early on. I also think that he showed enough to where you have to give him a chance if he's still on the roster. Like I expect him to play and for him to get, 10, 15 minutes a night and to really show some things. I also think he's a guy that if he needs to start he could start, and he could fill in injury situations and things like that. I think he opens up a lot of possibilities for them, but they have to be very careful with the matchups. I just don't know if he's going to be on roster. That depends on how the market shakes out and how much the Nuggets want some of these other players that they're after in trades.
And so, I mean, you kind of mentioned the draft too, with like Miroslav said, with Bull getting overlooked, and this upcoming one is coming up. I'm not gonna go into again because there's so many possibilities of what Nuggets can choose based on also what if they have even like keep the pick or trade up or trade down. So we're not gonna go into that. We don't have enough hours in the day for that speculation. But what is something that the fans don't appreciate about the front office and coaching staff synergy that might affect the draft and like the overall season?
That's an interesting question. I think the biggest thing actually is more about their relationships. So if you're trying to swing a trade on draft night, okay, it's not just about the players available. Everyone kind of makes it to be that. So like, here's like a little bit of info for you. The Philadelphia 76ers will not be making a trade with the Utah Jazz for any time in the foreseeable future because their front office the Utah Jazz front office does not get along with Daryl Morey. So these are the type of things that interact versus when you have a team like Washington where Tim Connelly worked for many years and is very close friends with Tommy Shepard, their GM, that relationship works out. It also helps in terms of if a player is uncertain about being traded to a place, especially if he's in the last year of his contract, say, I don't know, Drew Holiday, that kind of a player, Michael Malone being able to talk to them as a longtime assistant in the league who everyone respects, that I think helps. When we're looking at the draft, though, in terms of who they're going to pick, a lot of times, honestly, the coaching staff will weigh in, but it's ultimately going to be Tim Connelly. He has done this long enough. He has a good enough staff. His assistant GM, Calvin Booth, long time in the league, very well respected. The assistant GM, Tommy Balcetis, same deal. Like, he's very well respected in the league. Balcetis is very well respected in the league, knows what he's doing. All these guys have the same sense of scouting expertise. And so, and also a lot of, I think, is just honestly that Michael Malone's like, they're a rookie. I'll play them if I have to, but I have a rotation. So Malone will weigh in on what he thinks. Absolutely. They'll have a voice in the room, but I think ultimately it's going to be about who does front office think is best for the future.
Yeah, that's, I mean, and again, it was just the synergy, what you can see, I guess, with bad organizations. That's where you have perpetual, maybe bad organizations when there's such a disconnect between coaching staff and front office that you just have like a revolving door all the time. And you mentioned analytics, and I like, people who follow you know that you deal with them with analytics a lot, and you follow that side of basketball as well. My question is like, I'm a more of like, I guess, I don't know, I wouldn't call it a purist, but I don't get into numbers as much. I use it just as a help. How easy it is to get caught up in the numbers, and then neglect like the basketball intangible sometimes. Like, how do you keep that balance, or is the intangible part when you talk about the old school stuff, is that just, at this point it's maybe overrated, do you think, or does it still have a factor in evaluating players?
So I think a lot of it is, I'm always looking for the synergy and complete picture when we're looking at evaluating a player, a situation, or a team. And so the data, the numbers give me an objective view of reality. And a lot of times what this gets misinterpreted as is it gives an evaluation of the player or team. And instead, like, a better way to look at it is this working or is it not working? So if we look at it and we say, every single Denver Nugget, when they're on the floor with Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, they score at X level. X number of points per 100 possessions, which relative to the league standard is very high, except when Torrey Craig is on the floor. And Torrey's a high effort player, does his job well, total professional. I love Torrey Craig. But that tells you that something is not working with Torrey Craig and the starters. Like, something is telling you that that's not working. The old school basketball analysis will tell you, like, you're able to watch and go, like, well, he's not a scorer. You don't trust his three-pointer. It doesn't look good. You can see the defender sagging off of him. They don't respect him as a threat. So even though Torrey will have games where he shoots 35%, 40%, 50% from three, you're able to watch and be like, yeah, but he's not impacting the court because they don't consider him a shooter. So that completes some of the picture for you. But where we get caught up in is there are players. Here's one. I watched Joe Ingles and was just like, why does everyone like this guy? Like, slow, like he's a good shooter if he's wide open, but if you just guard him a little bit, he's not any good. But the numbers kept telling me he's awesome. So I went back and like watched and was like, oh, okay, if you watch all of the possessions, you get a better sense for who he is as a player. He's very crafty. He's very smart. He is a quality shooter. Like he's able to locate his shot very easily. The big problem is that when you're watching game by game, the human mind is not built to contain all the information, to absorb all of it. And so the numbers fill in that gap and tell you where your gaps are so you can go find it. And likewise, I think that if you're taking something on the surface quality of the numbers, then the eye test will tell you what you're missing. If you're like, okay, they have really good numbers when this guy's on the floor, but I think he sucks. So what's the deal? So you go back and you watch. I did this a couple of years ago with Kawhi Leonard because it was like, Kawhi Leonard's an amazing defender. You can watch him and be like, he's an incredible defender. But the Spurs defense was worse whenever he was on the floor. It was just worse whenever he was on the court. So it's like, are the numbers just wrong? And sometimes they just are. Sometimes it's just circumstance, or sometimes it's whatever. But what is it about that that's telling you that there's a problem? So I went back and watched all the possessions, and what you found was that teams were taking Kawhi Leonard and literally putting him in the corner on whoever his assignment was, and then playing 4-on-4 on the opposite side, and he couldn't help. And the rest of their defense wasn't good. So instead, when he was off the floor, they were playing 5-on-5 defense, and the Spurs were really good defensively because all 5 defenders could defend. But when it was 4-on-4, they weren't as good versus starter units. These are the kind of things that you have to really take into consideration. And the last thing I'd say is you have to, I think, also be in the locker room and talk to guys and ask them, like, you try and ask questions that get them to respond in such a way that gets you the real answer of, what does this guy mean to your team? What has this guy done to you? Did he talk to you at all? What has this guy said, to get a sense for the guys that make a difference in terms, these are humans. That's the big mistake that happens, is when you watched guys on television, you forget that they're people, and that somebody that has that they respect a lot and that has been there for them, telling them, hey, keep your head up. We're going to get through this. We're going to win this game, means a lot more than somebody who's selfish and who has, doesn't practice and doesn't play hard. All of a sudden being like, come on, guys. You're like, all right. Like those human dynamics, I think, matter a lot. And that's the missing part of the equation.
Okay. Everybody who follows you on the Action Network knows how well informed about betting side of the game you are. Can you tell me, when we have these crazy seasons like the bubble season we just had, and the next season that will for sure be at least a little crazy compared to normal seasons, how does this affect betting? Who is getting, a good side of that bargain? Is it good for bookmakers? Is it good for players? What would you say in these crazy times?
So I think the short answer is that in the bubble, the overs were the play, because I thought that not having enough practice time together was going to lead to higher defense. And that was true in the regular season bubble. It changed in the playoffs when you had better defenses playing against each other. But that was kind of the secret of the bubble, is everyone expected there to be unders because they thought everyone would be rusty. And I thought, no, they can shoot, they can score, and they're going to run up and down the floor. They're not going to be able to defend 5-on-5 because they're out of practice. And that was true. I think in the regular season now, off of a short layoff for some teams and a long layoff for others, I think we're probably going to see a lot of unders. I think that we're going to see low scoring games. So the playing under totals on scoring totals is going to have to be the play. I think certain teams like the Lakers and the Nuggets have been one of the best spread teams in the league the last couple of years. I think you have to be a little bit more conservative with them based off of how exhausted that they're probably going to be. They weren't especially motivated early on last season. I can't imagine what their motivation level is going to be like now. So I'm expecting for the Nuggets to be a little bit more reticent than I was in the past to back them in favorable situations. Denver's always really good as an underdog. That's been like the go-to, is if you see the Nuggets as a dog, get in on them, because they always outperform expectations when they're underdogs. When they're heavy favorites, maybe go the other way. And so that's a little bit of how the dynamic works out. Those are my quick thoughts on betting in the NBA season.
Oh, our fans of this question, everyone perked up, and you might ingratiate yourself with Serbia if they hit on your advice on the betting, because that's a big thing back home.
Now?
Betting is a big thing back home.
Awesome, great. Sign up for the Action Network.
Yeah, that's right. What are your plans for the draft night? Do you have some live show planned or something like that, or do you have anything else to plug? at this point?
No, so I'll be covering mostly free agency. I have a big free agency piece. I've got a piece on Drew Holiday. I'm working on Jamal Murray piece about a big thing on him before the start of the season about where he's been and where he's come from and where he is now, as emerging as one of the premier players in the league. I'll be covering everything. I expect the Nuggets to be busy, so I have to kind of react to things as it goes. I'll be on Twitter on draft night, not playing anything beyond that, just because I didn't have a real chance to dig into the draft last season, because usually I get into that in March and April, and well, there were other things happening then that I was a little distracted. So here in the United States, so not a lot going on for me, but I'll have lots of free agency coverage, especially about the Nuggets on actionnetwork.com.
Nice, awesome.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. Thank you for your time. Thank you for visiting our young show. We are rookies, and as all good rookies, we are trying to learn from the veterans. One thing I think we already know now how hard it is to speak to NBA personnel, to NBA players and coaches. What were your biggest obstacles when you were starting? What was the hardest thing for you to figure out?
The biggest problem for me, honestly, is that I'm not a big small talker. And what I mean by that is, like, I don't ask, like, hey, how about this weather? Or, like, gosh, like, I just don't. I just don't do that stuff. I'm very much like, I don't want to waste anyone's time.
Yeah.
And so I tend to do really well with people that are like basketball, because when I'm working, that's where my focus is. And I'm not very good at the other stuff. And oftentimes there's a level of schmoozing that great reporters, like smooth talking, that reporters are very good at. And so I always really kind of struggled with that. The other thing is just being able to put, because, you mentioned like the analytics divide. If I'm very numbers based, and I go up against somebody that is not, there's a real divide there. They're very hesitant to it. And likewise, if somebody is very much like analytics, business oriented, they don't see a lot of advantage in talking to the media. So there's always these kind of like things that you have to navigate. It's a tricky business that I'm still learning a lot about.
Nice, great. And then hopefully we haven't wasted your time. Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me, guys. I loved it.
Excellent. Everybody, please follow Matt on at HB Basketball on Twitter. But if you're watching this show, you probably already are, because not a lot of NBA fans are not following Matt at this point. Okay, please follow us. Please like and subscribe to Colorado Europe pages on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And we will see you in a couple of days with a new episode. Bye-bye.
Pozdrav.